This podcast has won the most vulgar language aquarium podcast award from Vulgar Language Podcast Awards International for the last 3 years. That means that if you are sensitive to language, there might be some language that will make you sensitive. And that's only because we're trying to have real conversations like real aquarists do in the real world. So you've been warned. My name's Richard.
My name's Ben.
And today on a special, on a regular, on another episode of Reef Beef, we've got Andrew Rhyne. Dr. Andrew Rhyne is back again. No, not to talk about Reef Beef, but to talk about, or Reef Retreat, but to talk about some science on the industry that has been making the news lately. So this is brought to you by our sponsors, saltwateraquarium.com.
Champion Lighting and Supply.
And powered by PolypLab. This is
Reef Beef.
Hey Ben, how you doing?
Doing good, Rich. How are you doing?
I'm good. Is there any we're gonna have to get right into Andy Rhyne. So Ben, we're gonna bring in Andy Rhyne, our good friend Andy Rhyne, who was just here talking about some shilling for his own conference on the last episode. But now we're bringing him in as a man of science in the hobby. Less of a shill. He was talking about Reef Retreat, which I also shill for. But it's Andy Rhyne. Let's welcome Andy Rhyne.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me back. It was funny. I was just on with you, and then like the day after I was on, after it aired or something like that, I think the paper came out, and then you messaged me, and then a few days later, you messaged me a link to the PBS News Hour show. So
yeah. So Andy, besides being awesome, he's also a scientist who actually published things, and he's actually one of the only scientists who's been consistently working in stuff that has direct impact with our hobby. So there's a few of them. Kevin Erickson's one of the other ones, actually. But Andy Rhyne has done a bunch of work on importing animals, how cyanide works with them. Is that good? If that's bad? And he's constantly, you've got your finger in what's going on with the industry and how's the industry working. And so you know more than the average bear does about how the industry works and what's actually happening, because you're doing science on how much is coming in. Is it healthy? Is it dying? Is it? So you do this as part of what's going on with your position at Roger Williams, or is this kind of a on side project?
Yeah. So, well, when I was hired, I was hired under this really interesting position. It was a joint position between the New England Aquarium and Roger Williams University. And so both of what you saw in the lab and the aquaculture work that we do that you saw in Reef Retreat is a big part, and the educational side of the aquaculture aquarium science major and minor and stuff we have, really big part of the program. But I've always been really interested in where our animals come from, right, and how the trade works. And so we've just kind of integrated that into the program. And so a lot of that work happens with me in the background. And sometimes I have students that are working on it. I have students that work on modeling fisheries and some other things. But they're kind of they're adjunct to each other, but they kind of are separated in space too.
Yeah. So how many other people in academia regularly cover hobby related stuff, directly hobby related, like you do?
Yeah, it's more than it used to be. And it's I think a lot of it is people who come and go often, who are working on another topic, and the aquarium trade happens to overlap with that topic or something. And so you'll see fisheries biologists or taxonomists. They're always in and out of that sort of thing. You'll have wildlife ecologists, people who work on the wildlife trade, become very interested in the trade because we have a lot of species that are either internationally listed in CITES or endangered or coral reefs under threat. So there's that community, the conservation community, and then there's the aquaculture community that's getting bigger. So there's this kind of adjacent, and what I had done a long time ago was kind of try to combine those into something and kind of stay focused in those areas. And so I think part of our work that's kind of unique, and my collaborator Michael Tulsi that I've been working with on this for about 16, 17 years now or so. He's been working in the fisheries and freshwater fisheries for for a very long time, probably almost 30 years now. So we just tend to stay kind of grounded in what's actually happening in the trade. And then we're looking at all this data. I just spent a year on sabbatical with the Canadian government, actually. So I was actually employed by the Canadian Border Services Agency, which is essentially their customs bureau, looking at trade data and continuing to build out the data system that we had built to be able to analyze data coming across borders. So we
So
kind of
that's
take a deep dive into this data, and try to help governments make sense of it.
so Andy's like the reefer scientist person. We don't just support Andy in the work he does at Roger Williams at his lab there, and because he does Reef Retreat, and that's really cool. Andy is actually fighting for, in some senses, and doing science around our industry, and not enough people are doing it. I would guess what you were just saying is a lot of people come in, they get enamored by it, and then they go, oh, well, this is a mess. I'm going to run the hell away from this and
Well,
concentrate
or
on
you'll
genomics.
Yeah, well, you'll have people with genuine interest in other areas of science that are somehow connected to using the aquarium trade, whether it's breeding corals or studying something about an animal that's an aquatic animal. So to me, we work with a lot of those folks. I'm working with a really amazing developmental geneticist at Brown that works on sea urchins. I'm working with an unbelievable developmental geneticist that works on sea robin, limb development at
Oh,
University of Chicago, right? And so they are interested in animals and the aquatic world, but they aren't like, they come to my lab and enjoy the lab as much as any hobbyist would or something, but they aren't working it's not an aquarium to them, right?
right, right.
It's their research animals. And so, you know, I think it's just how scientists interact at things at different levels, right? And so in different ways, and you're not going to have people who are necessarily like I was always interested in aquaculture and marine biology, and then I got really interested in aquaculture. And then I started working at a fish store when I was an undergraduate and got very interested
Yeah.
in the trade and just trying to figure out how to combine that and work on that. And then you just become interested in a topic and you just kind of dive into it. You realize there's really not a lot out there that has been looked at. And so you just kind of keep working on it, right? And there's all these holes that pop up. And so you just kind of dive down one of those holes that just doesn't have data in it. And so for me, what we try to do is look at the data and just kind of go where the data is going.
Yeah.
And that either makes people happy that we're working on this or makes people not happy that we're working on this, right? So I don't always have control of how people feel about my work, right? But what
Yeah,
we
but
try to do is an honest job with the data, right? And try to put enough context in the data that. And it takes a lot of understanding, I think, of what's happening in, say, Indonesia or the Philippines or in the United States trade to really put context in it, because you'll see all kinds of things pop up in the literature or something, and you're like, well, they don't understand the context of that, and if they would have understand the context of it, and I think, to me, some of the biggest context issues I've seen that happen in the conservation community is like the Fiji coral ban, or the Indonesians shut their
yeah.
coral exports
So
down, or those things where you just are like, wow, that clearly somebody had their mind in the right place to try to help coral reefs, but they did not do anything to actually help the problem.
right. So just I don't want people to dish on scientists, right? But
Oh no.
this is my introduction to not my introduction, but my learning about actual academic science with cephalopods, right? Is what happened after 65 days? Oh, we euthanized them because we were done. What? Because that's what scientists do. Scientists are not necessarily there to keep things forever alive in their labs. They're there to do the study they're supposed to do and then move on to the next
Yeah.
stuff. So stuff grows. So people in the hobby can't lay at the scientist's door that you should be studying and doing more things for the aquarium trade and for the aquarium hobby, because that's just not what you do. We're very lucky to have a bunch of crossovers, though, that do, and you've
Yeah.
stuck with it long enough that it's like you know,
Well, I'll be honest with you. I just happened to be, I was a postdoc at the University of Florida working in aquaculture on food fish, and the job post that I have now, the posting came open, which was literally kind of have what I was working in. And so there was a
perfect.
job that just happened to come up that was what I was most interested in life. And so, there's just not a lot of those academic positions out there necessarily. And so that kind of right controls what you'll see on the academic side of things. And then the
Yeah.
NGOs have the non-governmental organizations, whether they're animal rights or conservation or preservation organizations or public aquariums, they have different missions, and so those missions will kind of change, right? So you'll have, and you saw this with MAC and some other organizations where you know people are interested in trying to complete a task or work in a particular area for a particular reason, right? And so if those reasons change or funding or something, they'll change their work area, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's just the dynamics of it.
So just to jump in there, the MAC was the Marine Aquarium Council, and it was the last real attempt at bringing self-control
Well,
to
certification,
sort
yeah.
of,
So I
well,
mean, but that's a
yeah, they were doing certifications of fish stores and of exporters and of importers to
yeah,
help kind of get the hobby and trade on the same page. And that, like you were saying, some people don't in the industry and the hobby don't take well to science shining a light on whatever's going on for whatever reason. And we tend to the industry and the hobby tends to eat people. And you somehow you've got some constitution, 'cause I've had
yeah.
run-ins with
Well,
it, and it was like,
right,
oh
right.
God, that's
It's
terrifying. And other people have had run-ins
well,
with it.
it's so funny because one of my colleagues, he studies macroalgae, right? And the Valonia thing that the
Oh
pop in the
yeah.
bubble. That's right. That's who I went to when you asked me, like, when we were talking about, like, I think it was the first time I was on. I think Valonia does that, but let
Yeah.
me ask somebody who actually knows. So,
Which
um,
is that because people may not know, which is that the 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 common wisdom is that Valonia spreads by popping bubbles. We've always said no, there's no gametes in the bubble. That's not popping the bubble is not spreading anything. And if it was, then all of your biological controls are spreading it all over the place. We should stop recommending
yeah,
them.
yeah,
And we always knew it wasn't. Then Andy was able to find somebody to go, yeah, here it is. And then they gave us a reference that's in algae speak. And it's like
Like a phycologist.
yeah.
phycology
He
talk.
that's what he does for a living. But his comment to me always is when I get frustrated with media coverage or something comes out and people are getting mad at me because of something, he's always like, well, Andy, if you would study something like macroalgae, then you would not have these problems.
He's
But
proselytizing.
I'll be honest with you though, what I've been sending him is stuff Tia's been doing and other
Yeah.
things that people and saying,
He
hey,
is awesome.
your time is almost here. Right. So people are actually going to genuinely can be because he studies the turf algae actually that people have in their
Oh,
scrubbers. That's actually what he works on.
he's got to
And
come to Reef
so
Retreat.
yeah, so I'll see if I can get him to pop in because it's generally what he does. And so I think, what I happen to work on is things that, people might not think about every day, but people know Nemo and Dory now and, like general public. When I say people, I mean literally like people have no idea of the aquarium trade or the public. They might go to a public aquarium once or twice in their life, but the general public understands these animals and they kind of understand the plight of rainforests and coral reefs and things in the world. So it just happens to be a highly charismatic area that people and so that also changes how I think things are covered and stuff. So
Um, um, um,
Ben,
Richard.
what aquarium online sites do you like today?
Man, you know what? I like saltwateraquarium.com because it's all right there in the name. It even in their name, it even tells you what it is, man. Saltwateraquarium.com. And Richard is holding up his phone because they have, an online app and you can 3:23 a.m. You wake up from a nightmare and you're like, oh my God, I need ESV 2-part. So you bring up their app and you clickety click, and you know what? It's getting to you before the sun comes up.
Yeah, I'm looking at their what's new section, and they've got Aquapure RODI resin on
Ah,
sale. They've got a Core 15 on sale. They got a bunch of stuff on sale. It's pretty great. So check out their app and check them out online. They've supported us for a long time and we really appreciate it. So if you can, show them some love. saltwateraquarium.com.
Um, um, um,
I've been talking with you forever about that there's no centralized body, right, to run the
Yeah.
hobby. Um, and then when you and I talk to people about it, they go, "Why don't you guys do it?" And we go, well, Andy can't
No.
do it because he's got a
Right.
real job. He'll help." And Rich says, "If you give me, a $5 million seed, I'll get it going for you. Otherwise, I'm not in for the fight." But before we get into what's going on with you this week, Ben had a question or a comment before. I want to make sure Ben doesn't get lost in the Rich and Andy blah 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 blah.
Yeah, got run over. No, when you had said, and you'd alluded to it a few more times, when people get upset, is this just stuff like showing like the bad parts of our industry and people like, oh, don't show that?
Well, yeah, sometimes that's what it is, or they don't like the way the data looks, or they don't like a word I use, or like, they feel like something's over dramatized in the, or maybe something's not as big of a deal as it looks, or it affects them personally. I mean, it's just there's different variations of it, and there's different levels of like somebody likes to give me a hard time about a word we use or a title of a paper or something like that, and they, and which is fine. And then there are people who write really nasty letters and that sort of thing, which is also fine. People are that's certainly their ability and to do that, and their right to do that. But you just have to get used to standing on the data you have and trying to be comfortable with the way you're presenting data and just have to deal with it. And you can't also control necessarily how the news media covers what you're working on, right? And a lot of my work's been covered by, the New York Times, and the Associated Press did a big piece on it, and the News Hour here, and then a lot of it's kind of these hit pieces by like, this piece that came out in Vice, and so you just aren't in control of all of that things. And I also work with scientists all over the world in so many different topics of this stuff too, and they have different perspectives than I do on like what's interesting sometimes, right? And so what they find interesting, because they haven't been working in this area for 30 years, I think is like not like, to me it's like, yeah, of course we found 90% of the fish are wild because that's what we always find. But they were like, well, people don't know this, right? And so I think that perspective can be kind of useful to have somebody that's completely outside the field looking at this for, to see what they find. And they this, look, you might know that, that's a common fact, but the majority of the world in the conservation community has no idea what this means. And my comment around that is always, what's the context of that? That number seems really shocking to people. 90% of the fish are wild from coral reefs.
So that's the number. Essentially, I want to go in the right order because there's three things to talk with you. No, that's okay. And we'll get back to that 90% number because that's part of it. But I want to of the three things we have to talk about today, with you causing trouble in the news, being superhero in the news. Which one should we start with?
We can start with the recent paper we had come out, right? Which was in conservation biology.
So Andy is on a new paper coming out from Conservation Biology, Extent of Threats to Marine Fish from the Online Aquarium Trade in the United States. And that was just published like last week, right?
Yeah, so it just came out, and I'm kind of if you look at the paper, I'm kind of in the middle authorship of that paper,
you're
which
fifth
really
author.
means that my contribution to this was it's the most different contribution I've ever had on a paper. It's the most unique way I've ever gotten involved in a paper. But I was kind of I would say I was minorly involved with the paper, trying to add context to it, and actually reviewed the first draft of the manuscript and gave them a bunch of comments back and said, you've got to work on all these things. And then they contacted me about a month later and said, would you like to help us with the paper? Which is, I've never had an author do that before. I was kind of like, can I do that? And then, so Michael and Rob and I kind of joined this group from Princeton to look at it, because I found their analysis of the listing data to be really interesting, right? I really enjoyed their analysis of it. They just, what we did was we combined a paper that I had published in 2015 with Rob Holmberg, one of my former undergraduates, who's actually now a colleague of mine. And we looked at price, and that paper looked at size, and this one was looking at price and some other features like, how they're listed on the IUCN Red List, and their conservation status basically, and then whether they were from aquacultural sources or wild sources. And the most interesting thing I found about that paper was that the aquacultured fish that were from aquaculture sources, say only, and that's going to be mostly like clownfish now and some other things, in about 28 species, were less expensive than their wild counterpart.
That's good. That's good.
But that data, I remember when I saw that data in the original manuscript, I was like, wow, this is interesting, right? I have never seen that data point before done, right? We kind of knew that this was starting to happen because, I've got some wild clownfish broodstock, I don't know, 3 years ago. We're working on a grant right now with clownfish. And so we had to get some new wild broodstock. It took me 4 months to get those fish, right? And they were expensive. Right.
Which, we've always said that's how it should be, right? It's the captive bred stuff should be as cheap as chicken, and the wild stuff you should pay a premium for, and it should be collected and treated better.
Yeah. Well, I guess I've seen that on the wholesale lists, like Quality Marine, because there'll be some blue line clowns or stuff that people aren't breeding. And, they'll have the regular clownfish, and then boom, these wholesale $80 clownfish.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, and I think that's a good example. So there's just no demand for that fish that you're talking about in the trade. So there's no supply of it. And so when you get it, you don't get very many in. Right. And so the volume there is really low. And so I think it's really, like, you get a really nice specimen or two that's got that really beautiful blue line on that fish. That's a fairly, that's not because an aquaculture fish would take forever to get that kind of color to it. And so it's a really good example of like a fish that would, like, I mean, $80 for a wild clownfish. Say you roll your clock back to 2000, that clownfish would have been, $3 or $4 or something like that, probably. Right. And so, and we were bringing in, say, 300,000 or more wild clownfish, or 500,000 wild clownfish a year at that point, right? And so now you have to go out and search for wild clownfish, and we're breeding some unknown number inside the United States. Plus, we're importing some other unknown number from Indonesia, from Mr. Sue, and so and some other producers out there are producing clown. And so the clownfish are produced all over the world now in such volume that you were now at a market economy on aquaculture there, where you have some competition coming into play, and you have scale. And so prices are fairly low on, say, the wild type varieties. And then when you get some of these new varieties, the prices are up because there's less volume of that. So it's an interesting market system. And I was really interested in that number. To me, the most interesting thing about the paper is that statistic, right? And then also the other thing that I found really interesting, what we did with our old data from 2015, where we basically took data from these same websites. And that's the neat comparison, is you have the same websites, and you can look at the price.
It was four different sellers or importers or vendors, however you want to say.
They're vendors, online vendors, right?
Four different venues over several years.
Yeah, and so 2020, I think, to 2024 or something, versus our 2013, somewhere in that number when we collected the data.
Yeah,
back in that 2015 paper. And so being able to compare the price 10 years apart, essentially.
Right. It's super cool.
And yeah, it is really interesting to see that. And so I was talking to Matt Peterson the other day, and he was like, "Oh man, it'd be really nice to go even further back in time." And so we need to get a bunch of old FAMAs, and kind of just to see where things are headed, because I know a good bit of the market and how the trade dynamics. Oh, that's data right there. Yeah. So
nice.
I remember
Ben is holding up
actually.
FAMA magazines.
Yeah. So it'd be really neat to kind of look at that history can be really informative. So right.
Let's look at the 10-year difference. You found the amount of wild caught animals is about the same, about 87, 90% compared to
Yeah, and I don't.
aquaculture.
Right. So I don't think like, and so I think we have to talk about the context of that number too before you can.
Okay.
90% of the species that we saw listed for sale on those sites are wild. But if we would have included Biota Marine or the Bio
Gotcha.
Group or pick another couple sites on there, you would have seen a different but they're also not the most. I think those
The
sites we
volume's different.
we presented were probably pretty representative of what's available for sale or the sites that were chosen. But we know what was listed for sale. We don't know what was sold,
Gotcha.
right? And we
And
don't know how many were sold.
and do you need like to include biota? Why is that just a funding or a somebody wanting to do it thing?
No, their volume is so low, and people don't really
Okay.
they weren't around as much back when the data was originally collected. But what I'm just trying to say is like if you could pick a site that has mostly aquaculture fish or aquaculture corals or something like that. You say, wow, 95% of everything is sold as aquaculture because of the site you picked. But I think
Got it.
we pick sites that are probably representative of the broader aquarium trade than say maybe a specialty coral dealer or a
Gotcha.
specialty dealer. So
Okay, so here's a real important thing about papers and science and the hobby, right? You just did the thing that every scientist does when you start talking about the data in a paper that they're connected to, which is to go, let me put that in context for you because we can't do everything, right? So it's like
Right.
this is what we did and it's all that we did, and because nobody else has done anything, we win. And you have to pay attention to this
Well,
because no one else has done it.
it's an iterative process, right? And so like you're just adding layers on top of each other, right? It is
Yeah.
not, right? And so I think to me, I find it super interesting analytical job on the paper, really, and neat to work with this group from Princeton who has a really good lab to work,
Bing,
right?
right?
Yeah. Bing was the PhD student, Bing Lin. So Dr. Bing Lin was the PhD student in the lab that in David Wilco's lab out of Princeton. And they have a pretty big shop, right? So they run a pretty big lab
Yeah.
there. It's got a lot of dynamic stuff going. And so it's neat to have somebody from the outside come in and look at this because it gives kind of a fresh perspective on maybe what's interesting. And then we can just kind of add some like historical context to some of those numbers and things and try to put the paper together and kind of center it a little bit better. But it's not my paper, right? I was just kind of a small part of it.
Right. Well, we'll link that paper, but
yeah.
What we care about is, so we found out that in 10 years, it's still about 90% wild caught in our trade, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, the number
with the data that you looked at.
Yeah. Because here's what I want people to understand is that it could be 90% of the volume, and people get really confused about this because what you'll see happen in like the news media, like is 90% of the fish in the aquarium trade are from the ocean or from the wild, right?
Right.
And and I look at that and I'm like, well, 90%, okay, what is that? Is that 90% of the total volume, or is that 90% of the species? And I was showing someone like the species breakdown in the curve on this when I was talking, because there was a reporter from a journalist had contacted me, wanted to talk about the context of this. They were interviewing me for the context of it. And so I was showing them like there's, we found 2,600 species in the marine aquarium trade, right?
Yeah.
Many of those are like 5 came into the country or something in a year, right? Like your blue line clownfish, right? Like, okay, so maybe there's 100 coming into the United States a year on the trade or something like that. Really low numbers, right? So that's a huge chunk of what we call the biodiversity, or the number of species in the trade, or these ones and twosies and stuff like that, right? That's really uncommon stuff. It's kind of the interesting biodiversity. And then you have the common top, say 100 or 200 species that make up 90% of the volume. And so the volume is very interesting to me, and it's always been very interesting. But the number of species is interesting, and I think what you're seeing is like clownfish have always been cultured in large numbers since really ORA and Sequest and and Maritime Pro and then Sea and Reef. We have a lot of company, Quality Marines producing a lot, so there's a lot of production of clownfish, and so they're a stable produced aquaculture animal that is a staple of the marine aquarium trade, and it has displaced the wild fish completely. And you've seen that displacement happen in a couple places. Bangeye cardinals are another example of that. So
the royal grammas and the clownfish and the cardinal fish, the bulk of things that come in, but it's weird the peripheral stuff that
so
gets collected.
right. So if we took say there's 2,600 species in the aquarium trade, and that includes public aquarium fish too. So that's less for the hobby, but there are I was trying to map the other day. I think it's up to 500 that have been raised. Right.
Wow.
But
like that have
put
been
that in
aquacultured.
context. Put that in context too.
That to me is phenomenal. I'm like, wow. We have had like a banner 5 years. We've been like there has been scientific progress in the last 5 years in aquaculture that has really just been nothing short of impressive, right? And so, you would have a little higher percentage if you looked at every fish and then you said, okay, what's available from aquaculture? But again, they're not really that common in trade, and so yeah.
So with the 2,600 species, or do you want to go with the 700 species looked at in the current study?
We found about 700 that were listed for sale on a website, which means they're going to be more common than the other things that we found when we're mining big data sets and stuff.
The most common was wrasses, it looks like. Wrasses, and then angels.
Yeah, the wrasses are the most species diverse group. The wrasses and the gobies, but the wrasses have always been the most species diverse group in the trade, right? And the gobies, the wrasses and the gobies really kind of are up there in species diversity. And then the angels are also, because you have two big groups of angels, right?
Right.
And so you have a lot of species in there.
So of the 700 wild species in the study, how many are available aquacultured with regularity?
Like 28 species, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Is that good, or should it be more, or are we right like on the line where we figured we would be?
Yeah, that's again coming back to those resellers that we were internet resellers that we were looking at. There's actually more commonly available that are not on those sites, right? Like and today versus say in 2020 or 2022 or 23, right? There's even more available. So it would be nice to see that number come up some, right? Because I think there's but that's a market problem or technology problem, one of the two, right? It becomes, let's look at green chromis, because that one really kind of ticks the box for a lot of the conservation or preservation organizations, because they see that in our papers like the most imported species, right? And we list it as one species, but it's really three. But we list it as one because we have no idea which one it is, right? And we make sure we detail that out in the methods, but it always comes up as Chromis viridis. That species is so abundant that it is not. There's no threat to that species from the aquarium trade collection of that fish, as long as you're not breaking the coral or doing any damage to the reef collecting the fish. If you're just collecting the fish, there's no risk to the fish species, because there's so many of them on reefs,
especially if you get them small.
Yeah, well, they have a pretty high mortality rate coming in on the trade, like in people's tanks, right? People put them, they don't do all that well. So aquaculture would take that fish and make that fish like really successful in people's tanks, right? But it is a hard fish to raise. So now, instead of the lowest price or one of the lower price fishes that's in high volume, you would have a really expensive fish that's in much lower volume, because it would just change the dynamics of that, right? And so it becomes a really complicated question about how should you source that fish. If you could deal with the Uranema or the Scusacilia, it's not really Uranema, but if you could deal with that kind of protozoan problem that they tend to come in with, right, which causes all the mortality in those fish, if you could deal with that, and that fish was a really successful fish in people's tanks, then you would say, well, that's a great wild fishery for that to be, because there's so many green chromis out there that you're not going to overfish that. And then
Yeah.
you have on the other spectrum, bang-eyed cardinal fish, which are mouth brooders, do not go very far, have been over collected in their native range, and that's under threat. That's a fish you really want to focus aquaculture on. I think clownfish fit in that box too. They're endemic to an anemone. Like they're symbiotic with that anemone, right? They're not endemic to the anemone, they're symbiotic to that anemone, and that's where they live. And the anemone needs them, and they need the anemone. And so if you overfish that, you can set that system up for challenges. And so and they're a very popular fish. So it makes so much sense to culture that fish, right? So I think this is not a simple black and white question that you're setting up here. There's a lot of factors in that I think you have to look at.
What are the right fish, right? To breed. And it looks like we're doing a decent job on that. There's still some bespoke breeding places, PolypLabs. There's a lot of these little places that are working through biota now, which is kind of great to be able to harness the economy of being in a business that's already situated, rather than trying to break into the business. So
and there's right, and so what we've seen over the last, say, 10 years or so is some of that, like, where you've always had some hobbyist breeders. Joe Lickenberg up in Chicago, right, was breeding clownfish up there for I don't know how long, right, and selling a lot of clownfish, and you had a breeder in Arizona that were selling fish. So you've always had like kind of satellites to the bigger people that people know about, ORA or Pro Aquatics or something. But I think now what you're seeing is like these smaller kind of operators that are breeding things that no one had seen before. And
which
like
is
Matt Wittenrich's, some of that, and so that is, to me, that's the edge that's kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to. And then if you look at what Quality Marine's been doing, which is purple tangs. I have a Quality Marine purple tang. That's an aquaculture purple tang. That I would have argued with you 15 years ago that we would never see some of those things, right? And
it's crazy.
And they're available on, I'm sure, Ben, you could pick them up if you wanted to for your clients. And so they're pretty much constantly available. They're not cheap, but they're available.
Yeah,
we even have that Yerpul one. Have you seen that one that's a cross between?
Yeah.
I mean,
in fact,
there's some people out there trying to ask like $5,000, $6,000 for it, but whatever.
The two people that work for me worked at OI for a while. So I have a student that was my student, then went to Miss Aquarium for a little, and then went to OI, worked with Chad Callan at OI, and then they came back to New England, in Hawaii. And so we have a purple tang, and we had a yellow tang for 15, 20 years in the lab. And so they're like, we should get them together so we can make something. I'm like,
do it. Freak fish.
Champion lighting and supply. Champion. Hey, guess what?
What, Ben?
I just probably ordered probably $1,500 worth of stuff from Champion Lighting Supply, and look what I got.
Whoa. That is the packing material that Champion Lighting and Supply uses instead of plastic and styrofoam, because they love the planet. If you've met Todd Krunkel, planet first.
Yeah.
Ben, I recently bought a skimmer and some DI resin for less than $1,500. It was the wrong skimmer. I'm getting another one. But you want to know what Champion also sent me?
Was it the picture of me? Yes, the cardboard picture of me flipping the bird. Yeah, I got that too in one of my orders.
You have been shredded.
You know how surreal that is? Like, just one day I'm packaging material in Champion Lighting and Supplies packages.
It means that you've
made
it, or we have to raise our ad rates.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you to Champion and Lighting and Supply for all the support. Champion Lighting and Supply, run by Todd, who is a real freaking reefer, like unbelievably a real reefer. We're trying to get him to be on the show because he's got so much good stuff to say. But he's like, but I'm a sponsor and it'll be weird. And it's like, and he tells me that he's figured out something to talk about. So maybe we'll have him on soon. Anyway, Champion Lighting and Supply, go check them out at their website and buy some stuff because they're awesome.
Yes.
I gotta say with Chromis, anybody listening, don't get Chromis. They're such a big selling fish because they're inexpensive and they're cute, and then they either die or kill each other because we don't keep them the way they live in the wild. And when they're younger, they have a different way they spend their life as when they're older. So you're in your tank, you're not going to get a coral head full of 100 little chromis who do the cute thing that you saw when you were scuba diving. They don't do that when they get bigger. They're kind of dicks.
Yeah,
but
so I mean,
but there's so many of them.
yeah.
It's like I'm with what you're saying. It's not hurting the ocean to pull them out.
No, it's not. And as long as they're not damaging the habitat, taking them out. The habitat's what's important, not the fish. And
Right.
that can be really hard for people to get their head around, because especially if they view animals as individuals. And I'm more looking at habitats and the system as a whole. And so, there's no risk to the coral reefs from people collecting or most fish, right? And we've shown that pretty well.
And it's important also to distinguish between, because people on the outside don't know, well, people on the inside don't know either, but how our fish are collected and how they were collected and what's actually happening and how that all works. And, when they think, they collect these fish, and people have an immediate boo reaction because they think about, seine netting, and, they think that you're just going through the reef area and collecting everything. And that's not what happens anymore. It's better
right.
now.
So, I mean, things have improved out there, but things are still challenging, right?
Yeah.
So it is very complicated, and there's been a lot of people have done a lot of work over in Indonesia and the Philippines in the last, say, 20 years or so. There's been tremendous work trying to deal with the legacy problems of cyanide fishing, which was rampant in the 80s and 90s, and then in the mid 2000s or so. But it still happens in Indonesia. Like I talk to people over there quite a bit. There's still cyanide fishing for certain species. That still occurs. That's still, it's going to be a problem until, there could be some type of available test or something that was really effective and better governance. But those things are not easy. And so I think people should be more aware of where their fish come from. And so and I think the public and the general public, the general hobbyists, 90% of the hobbyists out there just have no context of where their animals are coming from. And so that's been the challenge of trying to work with the consumer on this end, and why there's been a lot of effort to work with the importers and exporters. But
again, there's no central body to disseminate this information. So getting the message
not in the
out,
United States.
Maybe OFI will be able to do it, but it's such a shame that we got nothing here. Joe Berger, if you're listening, we talked last time we saw. Let's talk some more. But so it's really tough to get any transparency about where things are coming from, and if they're do we have any idea how much cyanide is being used now compared to before?
No.
It's a black box, right? So we don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we know that there's significant improvement in certain areas, and we know that some species are still caught with cyanide in a fairly high level. So it's hard. It's not easy to get those numbers. But it's not a related. We just know that, and I know several importers in the United States that do a tremendous amount of work to try to know where their fish are coming from so that they can not buy fish that are collected, right? But it takes a lot of work to know those supply chains. And then you have other importers who just don't care. And so that dichotomy makes it a bit challenging to, right? It's kind of that unregulated market that you've got two different things happening at the same time, and somebody has a cost competitive, price competitive angle on them. So, my thing is, I think people just don't spend a lot of time thinking about where their fish come from and how or their corals for that matter. I mean, it's a whole nother discussion about, coral sourcing and that sort of thing. We'll have to talk about that some other time, but
I'll say one thing on that, and then we're going to get back to the paper and the reaction to it. I no longer think, I mean, it's nice if the end consumer knows where their stuff comes from, but I think that's a cop out. Because the end consumer just wants to do their hobby, right? They don't want to become a specialist in world geopolitics of wildlife trade. And so I think it's up to the vendors and the importers and the exporters to make sure that it's done right. I mean,
Well, you're exactly right, Rich. And
otherwise we're
yeah,
talking blood diamonds, and that's
yeah.
not going to go well for us.
No, and look, I think you're exactly right. And I think if you look at like, I mean, so now I sell fish out to Quality Marine out of our lab, right? We produce Yasa gobies, and y'all saw those when you're here for, right? We ship those out,
Awesome
but
fish.
it is a great fish. But I can tell you that also I've studied enough of the trade to kind of understand, and so Quality Marine had for a long, Chris has a patent on this QR code for the tank.
Oh yeah,
label,
that's pretty
QR
cool.
code.
Yeah, that's a way to track things through the chain.
Sure. So you could see when your fish came through the chain at the store, if the store is using the QR code correctly and they're showing that to their consumers. But that isn't, but go to a store and see if those things are available for you to know where they're coming from, right? But
High Tide Aquatics.
So you've seen those QR codes, and you can take a picture of them and it'll tell you, right? So they have gone to a tremendous amount of trouble to know where everything's coming from, right? But that is not the norm.
Right.
And so
PolypLab, 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 PolypLab. Hey, I have a PolypLab story because I've got PolypLab Genesis blocks in every single tank that I do freshwater and saltwater. And recently I took over a 300-gallon Reef tank and I removed a refugium and some other stuff, and I wanted to put some more biomedia in there. Well, I have a tank here at my house where I have a dozen Genesis blocks, and fish come and go out of there, but I wait for a fallow period for a while, and I'll move those Genesis blocks out. So this was cool. I sold the lady 6 Genesis blocks and sort of lined the part of her sump with them. So that's how I kickstart tanks. I have no reason to use something in a bottle that I don't even know what's in there or if it's viable or not.
Yeah,
Genesis blocks from PolypLab are the way to go.
That's a good story with everybody talking about, is how do you inoculate your tank in a way that's efficient? Live rock from the ocean is great, but Genesis blocks seem to be freaking great at it as well. I mean,
and I guess I should say one of the things I like about them is there've been other materials in the past, but those crumble and break and crack easily, especially when you're transferring them around. These Genesis blocks are, I don't want to speak out of turn, but they're like fused glass beads. It's a very strong, tough material.
Yeah. So you can build structures out of it, and they're really useful. So check them out.
Moving them around's not going to degrade them.
Yeah, and they're solid and they're easy to ship. It's great. So check them out. Maybe at our other 2 sponsors.
PolypLab, PolypLab.
Back to we could go through a million wormholes here.
Sorry.
And Ben is so involved. No, I know Ben is totally involved in his head, but he's like, let Andy talk. So the paper, 90% are wild caught, but that's kind of how it's been. One of the interesting things about the paper was the press release on the paper. You want to tell us about that? Because the translation of papers into the regular world is always challenging.
It's very difficult, right? And so this is the other thing that I think that people don't understand about science is that, and also in journalism, people don't understand either. The person who writes the story does not make the headline for the story, right? And so in journalism, right? So now universities in general, their press offices, and I interact with mine a lot, are really interested in your work, and they want to promote your work so people will read about it and the general public will learn from your science and your data. And so sometimes though, what you end up with is someone's kind of who's a media expert will say, okay, let's use these combinations of words because Andy, that's boring.
Well, it's also
And
because I worked in newspaper for a long time as design and as an editor, and you only have so many words for a headline,
yeah,
and the headline has got to get people to read it because the purposes of the news is, of course, to share information. No, it's not to share information. It's to make money. The news is
yeah,
to make money. Don't ever forget that. So the craft of headlining is a whole thing, and
right.
to a large extent, they could care less about what the
Yeah, and so
actual story is about.
well, and so I think, and I've watched media come from Australia all the way to the United States and in stories about the aquarium trade probably 6 times or so over the last 20 years or so, right? And so I know how many days it takes to get back over here. And so it's interesting to watch it kind of bounce. And so I saw the headline and I was,
What
when
was
it
the
showed up
headline?
online, it was like, I think it was Losing Nemo or something like that, and I was, and it is, if you think about it, people know what Nemo is, right?
Yeah.
People know that name. And so if you give it a name that people don't know, then no one reads it, right?
So
And then
let me give you the headline. Uh,
yeah,
Losing Nemo, almost all aquarium fish in the US are caught in the wild.
and that is true,
Yeah.
right? Almost
Yeah.
all, right? So people would say 90, because I'm very proud of the 10% aquaculture because I've been doing that for a long time. But somebody from the outside would say, well, 90% is almost all, Andy.
Well, it's
And
even
so,
worse. The secondary headline is
yeah.
research by Dr. Lin has raised alarm bells about where most aquarium fish originate.
Well,
And it's like,
and again, so the conservation community, I think this is what you have to understand. The conservation community, who's very concerned about natural systems, right? Um, they're very concerned about resource use in on coral reefs, right? And so, for that community, that number is pretty shocking to them, right? And
because
so
they don't know it
they
because
don't
they
know
haven't
it. So
looked.
right. So the fisheries community, fisheries biologists look at that number and they go, well, if it's managed well and you put the context in it, right, then it's not a problem at all. It actually can be beneficial to the systems. And so I think that's where the conflict can lie in some of these things. And it also is the general press offices sometimes, again, you have someone reading this and they're translating your paper into something, and journalists do the same thing. And so, but I think you cannot take your specialized, like what because you've been in the industry for a long time or something, and say that it's not shocking or surprising to people or something, because I've had a lot of conversations with my co-authors about that, some of these numbers and things about how people perceive those, because I was not shocked that most of our fish come from the wild, but they're like, this is actually really surprising to us, right? And I was like, okay, that's really interesting that we're seeing things a little bit different because of what we have studied and what we've looked at for a long time. So, but anyway, but to me, it's a press release, right? It's not journalism, right? It's like, hey, we're putting this paper out there. But then what happens is that press release then, and I've had this happen to my own stuff, and I'm a little bit more sensitive about it because of that, but it just gets recycled into, say, one of the Eureka alerts or whatever it is, that just kind of republishes those things. And then it showed up in Vice.
Right.
And I just,
What did the
I
Vice
was,
one say?
oh, it was like,
I don't have the Vice one
it
right
was,
here.
I can't remember it off the top of my head, but
Oh, Eureka
here,
alert. I have a
yeah,
Eureka
you
alert.
heard there was a press release, but the Vice. So to me, the Vice story is the kind of culmination of the challenges that we as scientists deal with when we deal with the media. Is that this the photo on there is African cichlids, right, which are colorful, really colorful fish, and then they're talking about cardinal tetras and other things that have, like, there's like, and I'm like, you're like, well, so I messaged the author of that and said, hey, did you talk to the corresponding authors, right? Because I'm just a small part of this paper, and so it's not really my job to go out and talk about the paper necessarily, like to
Right. You're
say the
fifth
broad
author.
audience. Yeah, so
This
I'm
is
buried in the.
Lynn's job.
That's well, and so you have corresponding authors who it's their work, and so what I said to him was, did you talk? The first question I asked him when I messaged him, I said, hey, did you talk to the corresponding authors for your story? And he said, no, I didn't, but I read. And I said, did you read the paper? And he said, yes, and I was like, that surprises me.
This is the Vice
So
guy.
Yeah, the guy from Vice. So
Vice author. I'm sorry. I'm assuming
so
it's
he
a
did.
guy.
Yeah, he is. So he had not talked to the corresponding
Oh,
authors, right?
oh my
And
God.
so
Can I just read
yeah,
the first paragraph?
sure,
Can I
sure.
read the first paragraph? Because it's short. Exotic, the headline is exotic pet fish owners are accidentally ruining the ocean. And the first paragraph is your living room aquarium filled with exotic fish might be one of the many reasons the planet isn't doing well so right now.
Oh, God.
And then it says,
Well, right. And so
82% of these fish. And it's just not what
think about this.
said at all.
Right. It's not what the paper says, right? And so to me, that's the frustrating thing about reading something like that is the paper is it's like scientists cure cancer. And you're like,
Right.
no, we found a pathway that inhibits tumor growth in mice, right? Or something, right? So I mean, I think that's the challenge here is that these things get translated and it can be really frustrating. But think about this, Rich. I bet you that people are not purposely buying fish that are caught with destructive fishing methods, right? I don't know any hobbyist who would ever go out and be like, I want to buy that fish that is collected the worst possible way and treated the worst possible way.
Just you.
They wouldn't even
Right.
know.
They wouldn't know, but they buy the cheapest fish they can find.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing.
Which is the same thing. So, but they aren't doing it on purpose, right? And so actually, if you think about the nuance of that headline, you think about it for a minute, they are not intentionally trying to cause harm with their fish tank. And so that part of the headline is actually, I find that not a bad way but the way it comes across, you're like, wow, that's really inflammatory, right? Accidentally ruining the ocean. I was like, well, we're a couple steps, we're not that big of, it's a small niche hobby. We're not quite,
Yeah.
But
and then the next paragraph is that means every time someone buys a neon tetra or a clownfish.
There you go.
And it's like,
and
okay.
both of those are so hard to find wild. You cannot find, I've never seen a wild neon tetra in a long time. It's unfortunate because that was a really good fishery for people to make a living off of in Peru, but they're all aquaculture now. And
is Piaba still happening?
But they're hard to find. Go find a wild cardinal tetra. Go find one. So they're struggling down there. That fishery is really struggling, and it supports an ecosystem the size of Pennsylvania. That fishery does. So, so it's not necessarily getting people to think about their choices and how their choices have impacts on the environment, because I think that's actually a really important thing for people to think about. It's the fact that the guy couldn't get the species, he couldn't say your people are buying this particular blue hippo tangs, right? The Pacific blue tang, right? Challenging fish there. It's got a lot of challenges with its collection, right? Would have been a good one to say that probably people don't know that the corals are broken or they're using cyanide or, there's only a couple places you can buy those from where you have good ethical sourcing of that fish. People don't know that, right? But the writer had no context of any of that because he didn't talk to any of the authors. And so, they have 7 million subscribers or something, so they have a pretty big group of people that are reading this. And so I did something I almost never do, which is comment on a journalist's work about I usually don't comment publicly on those things. I will write them. I'll write letters. I'll write stuff from behind the scenes, but I don't always comment on things. But man, I was like, okay, so let me just say something here. As an author of this paper, this article does not even come close to covering what we actually said. And so, and then I messaged him, and I think, this is the challenge. So people will see that and they won't read the paper and they won't look at what we showed, which is really interesting, right? And they won't think about the broader context of it. They'll just read that part, and that can be really, really frustrating. Let's switch over to the news hour because I can only give you about 15 minutes.
We only got a minute anyway. The only thing to say about papers is translating papers into our language is very weird, and the worst thing you can do generally is believe a legacy media. Oh my God, did I just say that? A legacy media write-up of a paper. You should.
No, but Rich, let me correct you there.
Yeah.
There are outlets that do an insanely good job at this. The New York Times does an insanely good job. The Associated Press does an insanely good job with this. Okay. I spent a year and a half working with the Associated Press on the story they did of the trade that they covered, right? That about 2 years ago or so, right? A year and a half. They didn't work every day, a year and a half, but they literally spent a year and a half fact checking my any comment I gave them or data I gave them. They would go talk to somebody else and make sure, right? So it's not the legacy media, it's the drive by, like sources like Vice, or that is not it's real journalists, okay, do a
Journalistic
really
integrity.
yes, they do a phenomenal job. And we might not agree with their headline or we might not agree with their conclusions necessarily, but they generally do a really great job with complicated subjects, trying to get it to people who don't have a background.
And what
And
Vice
so
is doing is just clickbait.
they're selling ads, right? And so
I love it. My joke turned into a beratement, which is perfect.
sorry.
No, it's exactly
just
perfect.
I mean,
But the take home of the whole thing is read the article about the paper, but then look at the paper. And if you don't know how to read papers, go to YouTube and look up how to read a scientific paper. Or maybe we'll do a session here about how to look at a scientific paper, because there are ways to look at it that will help you not get lost in the stuff you don't care about, which is most of it. Most of us don't care about most of the paper, right? You look at a paper, you look at the significant figures and you go, is this, and then maybe that gets you to read the abstract, and then maybe that gets you to read the conclusions, and then maybe that gets you to read the discussion, and then maybe you read the whole paper through. But you got to know what to look for.
Yeah,
and it's not that hard.
right. And there's no, but at the same time, there's a lot of wonky terms in there, and like, you know, and it's dry and it's data driven, right? So but anyway,
but this is what allows people to manipulate what's in a paper, because they know damn well most people aren't going to go look at it and read it.
But
they're gonna...
and if you look at climate science and right and how certain media, or you pull the one person who disagrees with it out of the 17,000 scientists out there, right? So that you can do anything you want, Ben, in this world. You can steer people in any way you want. People can do anything they want with little clips or information or something. But I think it's important for people to try to be able to grab context and understand the context of things that they're looking at, and that's just not easy. But organizations like the Associated Press, or when they get into something, you know, they have done their homework, and they might not get every detail right, which is also frustrating to scientists, right? And so that one small detail in the report is a little bit inaccurate, and you're like, they got that wrong. But to be honest with you, that's, you know, they're doing the heavy lifting of trying to translate work into something that people will enjoy reading and understand.
So don't be scared of papers. If you are scared of papers, take a look at the paper and then come meet us in the Discord and ask. There are plenty of people that will help walk you through whatever a paper is saying. And you know, they're just a paper, so they're only right until unless there's something else that no, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm talking about. If you write the first paper we are by definition correct about everything we said about the larger Pacific striped octopus, because we're the only paper. So booyah. No, that's not how it really goes. Even with that paper, you have to look at whatever's being said and go, well, maybe, which is really what science is.
Well, we're just building on people's work, right? So you know, and then so I think there's two things I think people could look at if they're really interested in this topic. Look at that Vice coverage, right? And then go look at the Associated Press coverage of the trade, right? You'll have to put a link for Victoria's paper, this article on that. But look at those two articles and look at like the work that someone did to try to do the topic justice, and then somebody just kind of quickly types out some words and puts it out on social media for people to click on.
And you can also tell how something was written if it uses like bombastic wording. And you can
sure.
Tell.
I mean, yeah.
It's just,
but anyway,
and I don't mean to come off as you know, an idiot, but you two are very smart people. And listening, you know, and you guys are my friends. I keep friends like you guys, and it just, I'm just throwing this in there, but it just makes me sad, because the veracity that you two will take to understand some information, and when I go out into the world and see the everyday people, and it's just no wonder we're drowning in bullshit, because no one takes the time to separate fact from fiction, and so few sources have journalistic integrity, and everyone's just trying to get clicks by writing a bombastic article. Yet most of the people out there, oh, did you read that Vice thing? Blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, it's
Well,
frustrating.
again, I think, but you know, my thought is that good work people will really pay attention to and remember, and then the crappy shit people will click on and forget about, like, and just kind of move on, right? But I mean, that's not always what happens, but that's just, I think what we can do. But yeah, I mean, it was
Okay.
to me, it's a really interesting paper, and I would encourage people to look at it, and then if they have questions about it, they can email Dr. Bing Ling, and he's the corresponding author, and I'm happy to chat with him as well. It's just like you like to drive the people to the
Yeah, it's his paper. If I knew
Yeah.
him, and could have gotten him on tonight, we would have done it.
That's right.
The last thing with you, or we can let you go. Do you want to
No,
talk?
I can talk for a few more minutes.
What you were on some PBS video talking about this, right?
Yeah, so we're talking about something different, actually. So PBS News Hour contacted me about a month ago or so, and was like, "Hey, we're really interested in inflation," and I am too, because I go to the grocery store. And so they were like, "We're really interested in inflation and the aquarium trade, and can you and
It's
so
tariffs.
yeah, and the impact of tariffs, right? And I have been thinking about this a little bit, because I've, like, looking at the different country tariffs and stuff, and knowing where fish come from, and being like, wow, that's a pretty huge tariff
Yeah.
on goldfish, right, or something, right? So
Because we're definitely seeing the tariffs in the equipment side of the hobby.
oh
already.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
absolutely seeing that.
yeah. So
Um,
they did. I think they did and in contrast, the drive-by that Vice did with some really solid reporting and new, and a really nice story that I think it's like a 6-minute story or something like that PBS News Hour did on this. And so I spent, again, another hour and a half, 2 hours talking to them about the background and context of the trade, so they could understand enough about it, then to go to that really neat freshwater store they went to and talk to that person there, which I thought was a really neat angle on it, because people do not get the view of a small business owner in this industry very often, that talk, I think, and that can say, look, I've I was raising fish in my garage, now I have a store, and I have a farm in Vietnam that supports people, and
the Vietnamese
so
guy.
yeah, so really neat store, and really nice website, and really interesting freshwater things. So, but the tariffs are, to me, very interesting, because fish are very different than, say, the dry goods or the filters and things, because of the freight cost involved in between the two, right? And so freight is an astronomical expense in the fish side of things, right? And so it depends on whether the fish is expensive or not expensive, will depend on how much the tariff impacts that particular fish, right? But you're talking about large amounts of money that importers are having to pay. I've paid 2 tariffs recently for things we've imported for the lab, and large amounts of money are being paid in basically an import tax that is then having to be pushed on at some level to the consumer. And so right now what's happening is businesses are like trying to figure out how much they can push out to consumers right away, because you can't just all of a sudden go, hey, we're going to have to raise this, this cost of this is going to have to double today because the tariffs have doubled or something, right? Or something like that. So they can't necessarily do that. I mean, we imported a piece of equipment from Canada, and literally the day it landed in Canada, for him to send and build the thing out and send it to us, is the day like 150% tariffs hit in China. I mean, so his prices changed overnight. He had to call me up and said, I can't sell it to you anymore. And so these are the types of things that are happening to small businesses. And there's not a lot of, like, small businesses. I think probably, Ben, you're a small business, right? You're basically so if your costs change overnight, like, I think it's really hard for you to probably necessarily pass all that on. Like, I don't know if you see this.
Yeah, since I'm so small, I pass it on right away, because I cannot shoulder that burden. But something happened recently where it's a brand that I used to use a lot of, brand of a skimmer, and so I had a new build coming up. So I'm not a store, so I don't sell stuff every day. It's just as needed. And I went and looked up the price to give the estimate, and I was like, am I seeing this correctly? And so I had to go check another source. And then I went on to our Discord where I have like fellow people in the industry, and it's like, did something happen? And everyone was like, Ben, the tariffs. And I was like, oh yeah. Because like literally the cost of skimmers doubled and tripled. And I was like,
I can
okay, I need
imagine.
to
Right.
find a new option. What the hell?
Yeah, and so that sensitivity to price, I think, is not made its way all the way through the industry yet, right? Because it's definitely the small business owners, the small stores, I think, are going to be hit really hard with this, right? And then you're going to have the bigger corporations out there that have enough cash or capital to kind of weather this a little bit different and kind of play that through. And I think you're going to see different impacts in different parts of the segment. What I'm afraid we're going to see might be similar to what happened in the last economic downturn, where you saw a real contraction of the independent sides of things, or the smaller entities out there, just kind of and so I was really happy that News Hour wanted to cover this, and they spent some time talking to a small business owner about it, because I think it's an important avenue to cover.
Do you have any idea what was the impetus for them to be so interested in that?
I can't remember. It's like when the producer emailed me, I can't remember if he has like a freshwater tank maybe at home or something, or had one, or somebody as part of that had had either was a hobbyist or is a freshwater hobbyist or something, I think, and so was really familiar with the freshwater, like at consumer side of it, and so was seeing some of this, I think, and so I was like, oh, this would be a really good story. I think that's what it was, but I can't remember exactly.
I mean, because it feels so niche to be talking about us, but it also makes sense too if you're a news company and you want to find more stories to tell that paint to the big picture of stuff, context.
Well, yeah, because right, beef and eggs, like people see that every day, right? And so
people
we'll get tired of talking about beef and eggs.
Yeah, and they get to put a picture of a bunch of pretty clownfish up, which is instead of a crappy headline, they've got a picture that works.
So I think that's
go ahead.
No,
You're the guest.
I think that connecting with people in a way that, as Rich said, with really some beautiful animals that are really charismatic and people kind of recognize, I think, is a way to talk to them differently, and people can think about it. And then I think to connect that to a store owner who's really, his business, I think, is really to me, I was really impressed with how they put the piece together, because as someone they're interviewing, you spend a lot of time with them trying to just give them background information so they understand the details enough to do a really good job with it. And then you have no idea how it's going to come out, right? And then you get sent the piece after it's out, right? And you're like, here's a link, and you're like, oh, that's really great. And so or you send them an email and you're like, oh, this one little detail about this word you used here, which is me, right? And if
did they allow you to do that before they run it?
No. Some places do.
Some places will still ask you context or something and say, can you check this? But not a professional shop like PBS. They're like, they don't want. Well, they want to take the information I have and then translate it. They don't want me in the way of the news, right? They want to, right? That's
like, let's wait to run this before Andy tells us if it's okay.
Well, but Andy has a particular point of view of the world, right? And it's not. That's my point of view. Is not the news. So
yeah. I had a reporter who sent me all my quotes and the
that's not uncommon.
Right. And they said, what do you want to change? And I want to change. And then the response was, okay, great. Maybe they'll let it run like that, because once it comes from the author to the editor, it all changes there too. But I don't want to take up much time. So it's a cool piece, and any piece that kind of talks about us, our hobby and industry, in a way that isn't berating, I love. Because we don't get enough. We barely get any coverage as it is.
Yeah.
So to have a good article, have a good piece come out is really great. Except I'm going to share my screen real quick with you guys and show you this. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
You see this clownfish that my cursor is circling?
Yes.
That so needs to be culled. What is wrong with that fish? Okay.
Like the forehead.
Okay. Now, okay,
Stop
to be
sharing.
fair
Okay,
here,
I stopped
to be
sharing.
fair. So, I was so nervous because you know, a couple funny things about this. One is they asked, do you have any footage, high quality footage from the lab, or do you have some pictures of you that we could use? And
You look
I
good in
emailed,
this. You look
well,
so good in this.
I emailed my PR people and I said, "Hey, they're running a story and they need some photos of me." And she emailed me back and she said, "Well, Andy, we have nothing of you because you don't ever let us shoot you in the lab. Like they shoot on my students and other people and stuff, right? But I'm always like, poof, gone."
Yeah.
And so I get up in the morning and I've got a nice shirt on, and my daughter's like, "Dad, do you have an important meeting today?" Because I don't have a t-shirt on, right? And so I'm like, "Man, I really need to dress better." But
Yeah.
so our camera people, our photographer at school put those together really quickly for him, and so now I actually have photos that look good of me again, so I can
Yeah.
like use those for like the website and stuff like that. So yeah.
It's a great piece. Everyone check it out. The link's down below.
But I was so nervous about those fish because we
But-
have fish in there we have not called. And I was like, gosh, what is
Ah,
going to
oh,
show up in this story?
Is that still one of your pictures?
That just shot that last week or something. So
I didn't
2
realize.
weeks, 2 weeks
Okay.
ago.
No, well, that fish is perfect then, Andy. And
No,
you
no,
should
no, no.
keep him
It
forever.
literally is. The funny thing is like we've been, we literally have like, we have clownfish because we're working on a couple projects with clownfish, and we don't really do and they kind of just that we move them out of the lab here and there. But we don't raise a ton of them, except for projects. And then we tend to hang on to them longer than people would, especially when they need to go. And so I knew that tank had some fish that had some, because we've been having conversations about like, what do we do with, and then I saw the video and I'm like, please, because we have some bat-winged clownfish in there, right? So I was like, God, I hope that doesn't show up. And so they didn't. And so I was like really happy with their editing, because we just gave them some links to videos and then they edited it all. So again, I never saw that until it was done. But then I didn't notice the slanted
Okay,
head
so then
fish did it.
another Rich makes a little joke that I thought was funny has actually hurt Andy's feelings.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No. I was actually nervous about like what would show up, because I know people will watch it who know what they're looking at, and they'll be like, because again, we shipped some Yasa gobies that didn't have high dorsal fins one time,
But they
right?
grow back,
And then
right?
and then, well, I read about it in Reef Builders when Jake Adams wrote about it, right? And I remember sitting in my desk going, oh boy, right? Like, because I knew that they didn't have but they do grow back, right? But should they be out? Right? He asked a very legitimate question. Was very correctly critiquing thing he was seeing out there. So people in the hobby look at things really differently. I promise you, no general public saw those fish and saw anything different other than some really beautiful fish.
And I would tell you, most people didn't even notice that fish, and no one would even have thought that was one of your fish. Just the still at the beginning, they would have figured that's not even yours. So the only reason anyone knows it's you is because you gave it up.
Yeah.
And that was, I was trying to get you out of here, but we got a thing there. Andy,
all right.
Thank you so much for your time on this, and thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing on this over the years and continue to do. We are proud to know you and thrilled to have you as a guest on here. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me again, and
keep fighting the good fight,
great
buddy.
night. Yeah, have a good night.
Yeah, so talking with Andy is always interesting, right? And what I get from that is, again, it's still, if we had a central body in our hobby and industry, it would make our lives so much better and easier, because we're going to get regulated. I've been saying it for a million years, but
honestly surprised we haven't yet.
Yeah. If we don't do it, someone's going to do it for us.
Again, this is the divorce court. This is the divorce court. Either figure out with your spouse how you're going to do it, or a court will do it for you.
Yeah. So thanks, Andy Rhyne. Thanks for Roger Williams University for supporting Andrew Rhyne and his work. And we'd like to thank our sponsors, saltwateraquarium.com,
Champion Lighting Supply,
and PolypLab that polyps us. PolypLab that polyps us. PolypLab that powers us. And I want to thank the Beefers. Beefers, thank you so much. It's been so nice to have you guys all to talk to in the members area and the non-members area, and to bounce stuff off with. And man, instead of doom scrolling, sometimes I just go and read what's going on the Discord. So thank you so much for your support. If anybody wants to support us, share and like the video, or click down below and go to the website and you can buy us a beer or become a member, whatever you want to do. We just like you and that you're here. So thank you for that. Right, Ben?
Right, Richard. We love you, beefers.
The end. Episode 147. Host Rich Ross and Ben Johnson. Guest Andy Rhyne, because we know that he's a doctor. Producers Rich Ross and Snowman. Director and editor Snowman. Thanks to our prime level beefers, Farhad and Joe's Coral Reef. And thanks to our gold level beefers, Rowan B, Adam S, Jim W, John W, Scott C, James B, Brittany, Francois C, Hannah, Bay Area Reefers, Ben J, Alfie, Robert S, and Leslie S. Without you guys, we'd just be on the couch. Are you using a filter on your face? Are both of you using a filter?
No, we're just super attractive.
You guys look pretty.
Vibrant. Yeah.
I
I should actually be really, really nice to the person that edits all of this and makes this sound so good
Yeah,
instead of
you should.
instead of being an idiot.
Yeah,
So,
it's hard not to do both.